Hey YouTube, Vermont Prepper. I happen to be watching a video about the apocalypse called Aftermath. It's on YouTube. It's actually a series that goes through how a family is trying to reunite with their daughter in the ongoing apocalypse. There's a lot of natural disasters. There's some supernatural instances in the series, and I'm actually only on episode number 3. So I'm not far into it, but very interesting and free on YouTube if you want to see it. I got to reflecting while watching that video about why I became a prepper. I don't know what it did, but it just started me thinking about, hey, why do I do what I do? So I'm going to go through this video and make it into kind of like a little series, not only about why I do what I do and how I became a prepper, but maybe go through some of the things that I feel are pertinent to why I prep, sort of ranking scenarios where I go through pandemics, cyber attacks, social unrest, terrorism, nuclear war, some thoughts about prepping, another part of the series, the prepper mindset, society stigma, concept of the gray man, how presidential elections changed the focus of my prepping. Maybe I'll go into a little bit about weapons, water, communications, as well as food, drones, and software, some of the apps that I use. I'm gonna make this into a series, but for now I'm gonna focus on just prepping. And first thing that I'm gonna do is go through my background education, so that you know where I'm coming from, you know who I am to a certain extent. I'd say that I'm somewhat of an academic. Right out of high school, I went to college for aerospace engineering, but I graduated in a 5-year plan, where it's usually only 4, and it's because I was marginal in school at best. Had marginal grades my first 3 years. It always bothered me since my parents paid for it, since I focused a lot on the social aspect of school, and you can't do that with engineering. It's impossible. So I was a late bloomer. My last 2 years I did very well. My first 2 years I didn't apply myself nearly as good as I should have. Years later, to redeem myself, I actually went back to night school to get my biology degree and math minor. I even took over the prerequisite classes that transferred from my engineering degree, since I wanted to prove myself that I can do well. And I did, because I studied really hard. I paid for it actually as well. And currently my day job is in a software company that helps financial services. I'm what's known as a site reliability engineer, and I have a team of software engineers responsible for software upgrades to client sites, and I'm also responsible for keeping our sites up and available for clients. Throughout the years in financial services, I've acquired 11 securities licenses, certified financial planning, and certified investment management analyst designation. And for those of you familiar with ham radio, I also have my extra class license, and I focus particularly on vintage radio because of their characteristics of being tubes that are less susceptible to being affected as a result of an EMP. So with that said, I want to kind of go into why I became a prepper, now that you have a little bit of my background. So what led me to prepping? I think, like some preppers, maybe not most, but some, it was at first an unconscious journey, meaning that life experiences led me subconsciously to where I am today. For a while, I lived in Miami, Florida, where starting in May of each year, we were in constant readiness for hurricanes. I had to rebuild my house actually 2 times from hurricane damage. I had a generator that I bought. I had a solar water heater, one of those heavy jobs that you put on top of your roof and it actually heats up the tubes to generate solar hot water. I had small stores of food, and I had a store of water. But my main prep at the time, unconsciously, was my 1974 Chevy Blazer. And what you see here is not my actual Blazer, but it looked very similar, with the exception that this one's body is in much better shape. I had a lot of rust on it, and I had skulls painted on it. It was painted flat black. I had door latches that were I closed the door with cabinet latches from the inside. So it was pretty crazy. I mean, I got it for $500, but it would go forever. It had a 350 engine in it, and it could go through anything. So that was my main prep in Miami. But I would say that the government and living in Miami with the hurricanes were more of a trained state of prepping. That was, I was training for prepping because of the circumstances of the hurricanes that we had to worry about. What affected me most, I think, were psychological experiences involving violence against my family and the terrorism that was happening in the world in general. Regarding my family and the violence that occurred to them, while I was living in Miami with my brother and we bought a house down there, he was down in Puerto Rico on business when I got a call that he was mugged and shot 2 times with a .357 Magnum, apparently by gang members, according to the police. And through some various government contacts I had down there, I was able to gather that, he was still alive. So I went down there the next day, and it turned out that one bullet went through his lat muscle and the other went through his shoulder blade, but it ricocheted down towards the heart. So the bottom line, after a week of touch and go, he was able to fly home on a charter jet where some friends of mine arranged for an ambulance pickup right on the tarmac of the small airport we flied into to Baptist Hospital, where he went into recovery. And I just wanted to get, my mindset at the time, I just wanted to get out of there, out of Puerto Rico, since the police there said that these gang members might want to finish the job to prevent him from testifying. And to give you an idea of what he was doing, all he was doing was taking out his laundry from from the apartment or from the car that he came back in, from the laundromat, and 2 guys came out. One guy had a gun, pointed it to his head, and it was just like a movie. I mean, it pointed to the back of his head, said, "Give me all your money." And my brother, he had some training in martial arts. He was able to turn really quick and knock the gun out of the guy's hand, and it went on the ground. But unfortunately, the second guy who was in the car had a gun, and my brother ran, and as he was running, he got shot in the lat and he got shot in the shoulder, but he was able to jump a fence and was able to get away. But luckily, one of the guys that he worked with happened to be looking outside of their apartment complex where they were at. So he was able to get to a hospital right away, and it was just a lot of circumstance and luck that he's alive. I really don't know what I would have done if he didn't make it. Thank God he made a full recovery, but most likely I'd probably be sitting in a Puerto Rican jail from rampaging if he didn't make it. Who knows? But luckily it didn't come to that. This incident happened a while ago, pre-9/11, which we really didn't hear at the time of too many terrorist incidents. There were some, but I want to speak a little bit about 9/11 and how that affected me. And I think it affected everybody in a certain way. Those of us that were old enough to remember. I was fortunate enough not to lose any family members or friends when the towers went down, but I felt that I did. The world changed that day for me. Before that, you would see sporadic terrorist attacks, and I guess the most famous pre Bin Laden terrorist was Abu Nidal, whose real name was Sabri Albana. And I would say he was probably one of the first terrorists that was able to have sustained coverage in the news. He was sort of the Bin Laden of the 90s before being killed in Baghdad by, believe it or not, Saddam Hussein. Anyways, when 9/11 hit, I was thinking that this kind of thing could happen anytime or anywhere. And even though I was out of government at the time and in financial services, for a short while I felt like going back to the government. But I ended up not doing that. I was focused on building a family, so I sort of stayed where I was at. And in 2006, after being hammered by hurricanes and family members being scared, my kids were young, they were scared from Hurricane Wilma. I moved back to Vermont. Not back to Vermont. The family moved to Vermont with since my ex-wife and I were from up north, we just got sick of the hurricanes and the traffic, and we wanted to change. I'd say for a number of years after, while the kids were still toddlers, I took a hiatus on prepping. I got to feel safe here in Vermont, and since living here really is what I would think it was like living in the 1950s, even though I wasn't even born then. You see movies and videos about the 1950s, and it was so nice, and everybody was kind, and they helped each other, and they stopped when people were crossing the street. It was just like totally opposite of Miami, where they'd actually speed up if someone was trying to cross the street. But at the same time, we continued to see a number of terror events around the world and in the U.S. And I'd say that something in my mind rewoke after taking a hiatus from prepping for a while. And that was on December 2nd, 2015. And that was the attack of San Bernardino. With those two people husband and wife supposedly, who attacked their co-workers and killed 20 plus people. And I've since tried to figure out what it was that affected me so much then. The best analysis I can come up with is that here you have a group of people who you work with every day, and you're having a Christmas party and they're having fun, their guards are down, they're vulnerable, and without warning, one of their co-workers happens to leave the party with their spouse, and they come back with semi-automatics, and they mow them down. They mow down 20 plus people in the name of Islam and the support of ISIS and the Caliphate. I felt that the vulnerability of the people is probably what hits me the most. They knew nothing and would not expect a co-worker to do this. It's the least person they would expect them to do this kind of thing. And at the time, I was going through a pretty bad divorce in 2015, and I was feeling pretty vulnerable myself. So I didn't want to feel vulnerable anymore. If you take that plus the political landscape that was starting to happen, that was starting to take shape, namely the most important presidential election of my lifetime at least, I began prepping like we only had a month left on Earth. And while I was prepping, I felt that I needed to keep it mostly to myself and to a number of close friends and family. But I'm starting to think that some people are beginning to come around that preppers could be onto something. And that's what I'm hoping. If you take a look at history, at the end of World War II, bunkers were common and people were focused on stockpiling food, water, and other kinds of staples. It was a form of prepping without the name. I think over the years it morphed into the survivalist community and became what it is today. I think shows like Doomsday Preppers both helped and hurt the prepper cause. Some of the preppers on the show were whack jobs, and I have one such whack job on the screen, the computer screen right now. It was the guy who was, he actually got arrested. He was a so-called marauder whose plan was to take away preps from other preppers. And I remember saying to myself when I saw that, because I used to watch Doomsday Preppers religiously. It was such a huge show. And I remember saying when this guy came on, good luck with that. You know, you better have an army. Turns out he was actually arrested since he had a felony on him that, of course, made it so that he couldn't own a weapon. And on the show, he was shooting guns. He was building his own body armor, and you know, he had a friend that shot him with his homemade body armor. It actually worked, which was kind of surprising. I'm surprised he didn't get blown away, but it actually worked. But it was all poetic justice to me. He got caught, and he shouldn't have been carrying a weapon. He I believe had some kind of sexual misconduct somewhere. I don't think it was full out rape, but it was some kind of lewd and lascivious kind of thing with some minors. Who knows? It was something like that. You can Google it if you're really interested, but it's pretty crazy. So that said, you know, although the show Doomsday Preppers had its faults, and there were plenty of them, you know, they always had the preppers that were, at least they portrayed him as being kind of crazy and, you know, overzealous in their prepping regimen. But what it did was reintroduce the concept of prepping to modern society, even though that past history has showed that we've always been into prepping. But Doomsday Preppers showed that prepping is alive and well in modern society. Now, hopefully, people are coming around and saying, you know, that not everybody's crazy. I don't think that I'm crazy. I just think I like to be prepared in case something happens, and it actually gives me some kind of satisfaction knowing that I am somewhat prepared for certain things that might happen in society, whether it be national disasters or, you know, grid down or pandemic or whatever it might be. I'm somewhat prepared for those things. So what I'm going to do is leave it at that, and next video I'm going to focus on SHTF scenarios and how I rank them, and hopefully you guys got a little insight on why I became a prepper, and maybe it wasn't rambling too much, but I wanted to give you guys a little bit of background on where I came from and why I do what I do. So please feel free to like, comment, or subscribe. I'm always interested in understanding how people think and why people do what they do. So feel free to comment on maybe why you became a prepper. I'd be interested, and I'll respond to it. So I appreciate everyone for watching. This is a little bit longer than I'm used to, but hopefully you guys made it through. Anyways, Vermont Prepper out, and as always, keep on prepping.